Recently, I came into possession of an interesting hard drive that originated from an original Xbox development kit or XDK. This drive was dumped and preserved in a previous video, and I was able to get 2 games from it: Ford vs Chevy, a pre-release prototype, and Fast and the Furious, a previously unreleased game for the OG Xbox, and I covered these findings on the channel. I confirmed that the development kit originated from a studio known as Technics, which is mostly known for the NASCAR racing titles, but on the hard drive there was a mysterious third title called LT Demo, and at the time I didn't know what to make of it, so I held back for a little while as I was trying to learn of its origins, and I'm happy to report I know exactly what this LT Demo is, and we've got some big news. The LT Demo appears to be a prototype of Crash vs Spyro Racing, a game that, to be honest, I've never even heard of before being a thing. Both Crash Bandicoot and Spyro the Dragon, of course, have their own individual kart racing titles, but a crossover like this is unheard of. But let's go ahead and take a closer look at this LT Demo. It's playable and it runs by itself, and it looks pretty good. This, of course, does appear to be a kart racer, which back in the days of the OG Xbox and PlayStation 2 were very popular. The demo itself is a very small vertical slice, perhaps to pitch the game to a publisher, or at the very least an early prototype of a game in development. The LT Demo itself features both single and 2-player modes, being able to race around a single track, and during the race you can add various assists to enable the character to boost up and even take shortcuts or block to add obstacles in the race to stop the second player from overtaking you. Overall, it's a very small demo, but it runs quite well. There's not really much else that you can do. So the question now is, how do we know that this game is indeed Crash vs Spyro Racing? The demo itself doesn't really give anything away to suggest that it is, and it doesn't really seem to have anything to do with Crash Bandicoot or Spyro the Dragon. Now at this point you're probably wondering, MVG, what does this game actually have to do with Crash vs Spyro Racing? Is this really more than an elaborate hoax? What is the actual deal here? Well, as we'll see, I've found some compelling evidence on the hard drive that pretty much proves outright that this is the Crash vs Spyro prototype. Now when you're playing the game, these wooden crates look familiar, and they even sound familiar if you've ever played Crash Bandicoot before. Now of course, this isn't the most compelling piece of evidence, so let's proceed and take a look at the executable itself. Simply by opening up the file in a hex editor, you can clearly show the executable name as Crash vs Spyro Racing.exe. Incidentally, this executable was stored in a folder known as Research. Perhaps this folder gives more evidence and credence to being a small vertical slice. Now, the most compelling piece of evidence is located in the subfolder of the game in the videos folder, which contains a few movies. And if we open up this Xbox Test 640x480 movie file, it contains what appears to be an intro full motion video sequence for the game. And if that information wasn't compelling enough, evidence number 4 is on the hard drive image itself. I uncovered a deleted executable called Crash vs Spyro Racing _r.xbe. When attempting to launch this version, it appears to be identical to the previous version we have. With that said, it's much larger in file size, perhaps pertaining it to being a debug build. Nonetheless, what we have here looks to be one of the first ever versions discovered of Crash vs Spyro Racing in playable form. Now, I did want to dig deeper into the story and learn more about its origins, because as mentioned, the dev kit appears to come from Eutechnyx. But here's the thing, when I asked around about this LT demo, I initially assumed that LT was the initials of the developer who was working on the game. Now, because this development kit seems to have come from Eutechnyx, I made the assumption, albeit the incorrect one, that this LT demo was also from Eutechnyx as well. So I kind of talked to various developers that worked at Eutechnyx during that time frame from 2002 to around 2006 that are very familiar with the games that we'd shown on the previous episode, but they had no knowledge of the Crash vs. Spyro Racing game. When I showed it to them, no one had any idea what this was, and that really did surprise me. But what it turns out to be is that this game, Crash vs. Spyro Racing, has nothing to do with Eutechnyx at all. I decided to look at these movie files again. This time I played the second video file, which gave me some clues because it referenced what was known as LT Studios. But then I remembered something that friend of the channel RGT85 had once shown me on an Italian website. Crash vs. Spyro Racing, the crossover game never made, said the headlines. And when reading through the article, and full disclaimer, this is via Google Translate, suggests that Argonaut Software created Crash vs. Spyro Racing in 2003, but the game never released. Now, Argonaut Software, if you're a fan of Nintendo, is somewhat of a household name. They were responsible, obviously, for the Star Fox line of games, or at least the initial batch of Star Fox games, and more importantly, they worked in close tandem with Nintendo to develop the Super Effects chip. Now, this article goes on to say that according to member Dink, who was affiliated with the Hidden Palace website, they said the following: "Do you remember an Argonaut project called Crash vs. Spyro Racing? An Xbox debug kit that was once used by Argonaut was downloaded a while ago, and there was a crash dump for the game. Although, unfortunately, the kit was then reused, so most of the data related to it was lost, and the only thing that was able to be recovered was a title screen from the crash dump of the hard drive." Now, initially when I saw this, I disregarded this information because it appeared as though Argonaut had nothing to do with this game. When I spoke to Dylan Cuthbert, who did work at Argonaut, he wasn't familiar with the title at all. But he did say that by the time the year 2000s had rolled around, he had already left the studio and was working in Japan on the PlayStation 2. And because this development kit had mostly Eutechnyx games on it, I just assumed that Eutechnyx was the developer that was in charge of this Crash vs. Spyro Racing game. But as it turns out, it was Argonaut all along. If we take a closer look at this legal text at the bottom of the screenshot that Dink had recovered from the old dev kit, it says LT Studios. This of course references the LT demo that we found on our Eutechnyx development kit, and the LT Studios references the studio that developed the game. So how is Argonaut connected to all this? Well, according to Moby Games, LT Studios formed in 1999 and became operational in July of 2000. LT Studios was a UK game development studio that was headed by Andrew Parsons, with Jez Sand and Joss Ellis as directors. In the year 2000, Argonaut Games already invested in the company, and then in September of 2001, Argonaut Software acquired the remaining 70% interest, and LT Studios became a wholly owned subsidiary of Argonaut. And unfortunately, by 2004, business wasn't going very well, and both Argonaut and LT Studios had closed their doors. LT Studios had released one title, and that was Malice for the original Xbox. Now, at first glance, it appears as though that this build that we have here of Crash vs. Spyro Racing is much earlier than the Hidden Palace discovery. However, that may not be the case at all. The title screen that we saw is dated 2003. However, this build that we found on the dev kit is dated Thursday, March 4, 2004. And also, as a side note, the LT Studios website mentioned 2 active projects and a third in the prototype phase. Given that LT Studios closed their doors in 2004, it's safe to say that Crash vs. Spyro Racing was probably that prototype that would never see release. Now, as mentioned, I will leave various links to the LT demo as well as the complete hard drive image in the description below, so check that out. If you have a modded Xbox, you can run and take a look at these things yourself. The hard drive image as well can be mounted directly into an emulator such as XEMU, and with the appropriate debug BIOS, you can effectively reconstruct a Xbox development kit and use this hard drive image as your base. So you can basically take a look at everything that I've shown you in this episode today on XEMU. So that's pretty cool in of itself. You can also use a tool such as FATX Explorer to find and recover deleted files off the hard drive. And this is very interesting because when a dev kit gets wiped and reformatted, there are traces of older files on the hard drive, and there are definitely deleted files on this hard drive image, and some of them may be of interest to some people. So I've left the hard drive image available for you to download and mess around with as well, and hopefully the community can find some more discoveries here. But I do want to kind of leave the last word to, look, I'm someone that obviously believes in video game preservation. I'm certainly trying to do my part to help out, and if anyone out there has any interesting development kit from the old Xbox days, you know, I'm more than happy to dump and preserve it and get it out there to the public. So reach out to me if you have any kind of old stuff that you would like to get preserved. I'm more than happy to help. But we're going to leave it here for today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, please don't forget to leave me a thumbs up, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye for now.